and get this shared. All right, so chapter 10, like I said, if we're making the comparison, 9 is all about shoes and the broadest sense. Every shoe has a sole. Every shoe has, some way to hold it on your feet. Chapter 10 is more specific. It's about a certain type of shoe. It's about Nikes. How does this one type of shoe work? So how does this one contract specifically work? How is it different from other contracts? That's what we're going to focus on in chapter 10, because we're going to focus on the NC Realtors version of the contract. We already talked about how important it is to have a contract in place because it lays out all the terms of the agreement and what the two parties have agreed to do for each other as the buyer and the seller. And just as a reminder, as we just left off before the break, we are not allowed to draft contract language. We can simply fill in the blanks on forms that have been pre-printed for us. In North Carolina, and so this would, almost everything in this chapter would show up on the North Carolina specific. When people say, well, what stuff do I study for the North Carolina section of the test? Well, you study North Carolina license law and you study chapter 10. Because this chapter is all about the NC Realtors contract. Well, so that means it's only going to be used in what state?
North Carolina.
In North Carolina. This is specific in North Carolina. This is the sales contract that is published by the North Carolina Association of Realtors, not by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. I got to hammer that home. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission does not publish forms for you to use in your business. They're not there. The Real Estate Commission does not exist to help you do the business. If it's a form that helps you get paid or helps you do the business, it does not come from the North Carolina Real Estate Commission.
They could care less if you get your form.
They could care less what form you use or if you get paid or if you never get paid. What they would simply say to you is, use whatever contract you want as long as it was drawn up by an attorney. This form is drawn up by attorneys that work for the North Carolina Association of Realtors. So the only people that can use it are people who pay to be members of the North Carolina Association of Realtors. Does that make sense for everybody? This form is specifically available to people who have chosen to join the North Carolina Association of Realtors. And now you'll hear us refer to it, by the way, several ways. The offer to purchase and contract from NC Realtors. Sometimes we'll say the 2T form. That's just its form. Not all the forms from NC Realtors have little, like when you do your taxes, you have a form 1040, type thing. This is just the form number for the form, the 2T, offer to purchase and contract.
And just for the visual learners, we'll kind of glaze over one.
Oh yeah, we're going to take a look at one. We're going to take a look at several pieces of it. Yeah, for sure. Okay, and that you all have it in your OneDrive folder. I've given you a blank copy of it for example purposes. So why do we focus on this one contract? We focus on this one contract, this one from NC Realtors, simply because it is the most common one in North Carolina.
Yep.
9 times out of 10, if residential property is being bought and sold in North Carolina, the contract that's being used is the contract that comes from NC Realtors. And that's why we focus on it in class, because it is the most common one. It's the one you're most likely to encounter. Now, just like any contract, there are rules that have to be followed. Now, this is where I'm going to give you a choice. Do you want to memorize 19 things or 2 things? I'm not going to make you memorize both. I'll give you a choice. Do you want to learn the 19 things the Real Estate Commission says must be in a sales contract? Or do you want to learn the 2 things that the Real Estate Commission says cannot be in a sales contract?
2.
Seth said the 19. Yusra wants to learn 21 of them. She wants them all added together, apparently. I'm going to go out on a limb and say most of you want to know two things. Two things. And that's all I'm going to make you learn is two things. Here are the two things that cannot be, and I'll do them in different colors so you can see me kind of break them out. Number one, any statement concerning payment commission. That's number one that cannot be in a sales contract. So can we put anything in a sales contract that says the seller is going to pay a 5% commission? Can that be in the sales contract?
No.
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 We have listing agreements for that. We have buyer agency agreements for that. The sales contract is an agreement between the buyer and the seller. Commission's got nothing to do with that. Does that make sense for everybody? Mm-hmm. So we are completely forbidden from putting our commission in the sales contract between the buyer and the seller. Is everybody all right with that statement? That's the first thing that cannot show up in there. The second thing that cannot show up in there is any statement about broker liability. That's number two. So the blue is number one, the orange is number two. Just like we can't put in there that we're going to be paid 6% commission, we can't put in there we're not liable. We can't be sued. We're not responsible for mistakes. We're not responsible for misrepresentation. Seth put it a good way over there in the chat. Any statement that would get us off the hook and keep us from getting sued, we're not allowed to put it in the sales contract. So basically, the two things that can't go in the sales contract actually both relate to who?
Broker.
The broker.
Real estate agents. We can't put anything about ourselves in the sales contract. Are we all good with those two things?
Yeah.
That's what the North Carolina Real Estate Commission says. Those two things cannot show up in a sales contract. We talked about the fact that a sales contract has to be in writing. We've already done that. So that's nothing new. Okay. And Amber brings up a great question. Commissions and all that stuff could show up in an agency agreement. Absolutely. That's where we would want to see like a 5% commission or, you know, in our listing agreements, in our buyer agency agreements, just not in the sales contract. Here's what they don't want. Let me tell you what they don't want. They don't want us refusing to present offers because one offer has us getting paid less of a commission than the other. If we could write the commissions into, imagine a world where it was okay for us to put commissions into the sales contract. So here comes an offer, and this one says, here's our offer, and we're going to pay the real estate agent 6%. And here comes another offer, and it says, we're going to pay the real estate agents 1%. Do you think there might be some heavy temptation for the real estate agents to forget that 1% whenever it existed? Y'all with me on that? So as a way to avoid that, the real estate commission just says it can't be in there, period. When you present an offer, it can't have anything to do with commission. That's a separate agreement. Have your commission agreements as a separate thing. Don't make them dependent on the contract.
Yeah. Cleaner that way.
Much cleaner that way. Because there are states where the commission is right there in the offer. And it does influence people's decisions. I've seen it happen.
I can imagine, yeah.
I've seen it happen. Okay.
Oh,
So we talked earlier about this idea of offer and acceptance. Just kind of a reminder. When do we actually have a contract? Is it when both parties have signed, or do we still need another step?
You need to communicate.
We need to communicate back across that division, right? We don't have a contract until we have offer, acceptance, and then communication of acceptance back to the other side. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
That is the moment of contract formation. And that's when earlier, I mapped out and I said, think of it almost like a tennis match where you have this line down the middle and you have the buyer over here and the seller over here. And then we started putting people on their correct teams. You know, if we said Sherry of ABC Real Estate is listing a property for sale, well, if we've got Sherry of ABC Real Estate listing a property for sale, they both go on the seller's team. And the buyer, Bobby, so there's Bobby, is over here, he's the buyer, is being represented by Carlos of XYZ Real Estate. Okay, and so you just kind of put people on their teams, and then you start, okay, and Carlos makes an offer, which is, or Bobby makes an offer, which is submitted by Carlos over to Sherry. Well, there you go. Sherry presents it to the seller. The seller signs it without making any changes and drops it in the mail back to the ABC office. At what point in time did we have a contract? What's the answer?
We don't have contract yet.
We don't have a contract. Even though it's been signed by both parties, we don't have one yet because we've never communicated back in. The piece we're missing is this way, right? We're missing that. And so what if it went on to say 3 days later, ABC's office received a signed agreement and immediately scanned a copy over to the XYZ Realty office? Would we have a contract then?
Yes, you would.
Yes.
Even though Bobby, the buyer, didn't know he was under contract, would he be under contract?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes, because there had been communication of acceptance back to his side.
Which is a weird thought, but you just have to accept it.
You do. You do. That's the way legally it works. Okay? So just a reminder about that whole offer and acceptance thing. Offers are take it or leave it. I cannot stress that enough. If somebody makes one change, even one tiny change, what have they actually created?
Counteroffer.
A new offer, a counteroffer. And a counteroffer is a rejection of the original offer. Does that make sense for everybody?
Oh,
So even
Yes.
the slightest change, tiny little change, creates a counteroffer and rejects the original offer. All offers must be presented. Even if we're under contract, do we have to continue to present offers if they come in? We sure
Yep.
do.
Yes.
If the thing is
And what?
written on a napkin in lipstick, do we have to present the offer?
yes.
Yep.
How
Yes.
about if they call us and they don't even put it in writing? They just give us a verbal offer. Do we have to make the seller aware of it?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
All offers. And the reason is it might impact their decision making. If they're trying to weigh out one offer and you tell them, well, I just got a call from another agent who says they're going to be bringing us an offer, might the seller decide they want to wait and see what that offer looks like?
Mhm. Yes.
And it's their choice. So we
Can I
present,
ask you something, Trav?
sure.
So when we represent the offers, do we present it by order or all one time?
Everything
In
you
order?
have, everything you have in hand at the time you're presenting, everything that's in your possession at the time you're presenting, you present them all at one time. So when
All
you,
in one
when
time.
you
Okay.
are presenting offers to the seller, if you, let's say you're going to get together with the seller at 5 o'clock this afternoon to present offers, and by 5 o'clock you have 3 offers, you don't lay them out and say, this was the first one that came in and this was the second one that came in. You just simply say, here are the offers. We have 3 of them. And you don't put any preference on them.
Okay.
Okay? Don't put them in a particular order. And acceptance just means we've accepted it without making any changes. We talked about what counter offers are. How can we communicate acceptance? Well, it can be in any way. Don't let them on the test talk you into the fact, well, the offer was presented in person. So what? That doesn't mean the communication of acceptance has to be presented in person. just because somebody brings us an offer in person, does that eliminate our ability to call them and say we've accepted their offer, or can we still call
You can do whatever you want, but you can
them? We
call
can do
them.
whatever we want. We can use smoke signals if that's what we want to use. I think there's an old joke in there. My grandfather used to say the 3 best ways to communicate anything. You could use the telephone, you could use the telegraph, or you could tell a woman. Any one of those 3 would be very effective in communicating it. I'm sorry, that's a terribly sexist joke. Yeah, I'm sorry, but
Oh, it's 2020,
it's
Travis.
cute. It's cute.
But no, your
Cute
grandpa
because an
seems
old
funny.
person said it. Okay, all right. You
I
have to.
heard you use that analogy on one of your videos, but you said tell a Travis.
That he used to say that too. You know, you could telephone, telegraph, or tell Travis. Either one of those would work. You know, to get the point across. Y'all give me a second. I have to open the door again for Grumpers over here, and he's decided he's had enough real estate class for right now. All right, I'm back. I don't know who's, either Seth is babbling or somebody's got their baby on nearby. But communication of acceptance can happen with any usable format. That all works. That all works. Okay.
Travis, I
yes.
just had a quick question back to the offer. You said that all offers must be presented, so they have to be presented even if they're going under contract.
That's right. Even if we're under like for example, I had a closing today. We've been under contract for 2 months on that thing. If I had gotten an offer in this morning, I would have still had to present it to the seller. I would have been obligated by law to still present that offer. Now, could they do anything with it? No. I mean, because they're already under contract. It's going to close. There's not a thing they could do about it. So in some ways, it's kind of like painful that we have to present them. Because what if I got an offer for $3 million on that house this morning? I'd have to present it to them and say to them, well, you can't accept it though, because you already agreed to sell it for $300,000 to somebody else. And they'd be like, well, then why'd you tell me about it? Because I have to. I don't have a choice. Okay. So we always present all offers. All right. We talked about the mailbox rule. The mailbox rule is really pretty simple. It does not matter when communication is read. It matters when it is what?
Sent.
Sent. It matters when it is sent. When we're communicating acceptance, it is when it is sent. But be very careful to make sure that the communication of acceptance, remember, you have the buyer side, you have the seller side. Remember, communication of acceptance always has to cross the boundary between the two. Don't get talked into it being, so what if they say this, the buyer submits an offer to the listing agent, Seth, and then Seth submits it to the seller. The seller signs it without making any changes and drops it in the mail to Seth. At what point do we have a valid contract? What's the answer?
Not a contract.
It's not a contract. It doesn't matter that it was mailed because he was mailing it to someone on his side of the transaction. It's got to be mailed or communicated back this way to form a contract. Does that make sense for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so be careful who it's being mailed to when you're on the test. So let's talk about this 2T offer to purchase and contract from NC Realtors. And just to show you what it looks like, here is what page 1 of it looks like. And to show you where I'm getting the 2T from, if you look down at the bottom down there, it tells you that it comes from the North Carolina Association of Realtors. And it actually says right there, you know, standard form 2-T. So this shows you that this form is the NC Realtors version of the form, and it's called an offer to purchase, and then it becomes a contract. It's an offer to purchase when only one party has signed it. But when both parties have signed it and that's been communicated, it's now called the what?
Contract.
The contract.
Oh, I'm
And
sorry.
so that's why they call it the offer to purchase and contract, is because it's used for both purposes. It's used as an offer, but it's also going to be used as the actual contract. Does that make sense for everybody? Because basically what's going to happen is the offeror is going to fill this thing out, send it to the offeree, and hope they sign it without making any changes. But this form is by far the most commonly used one in North Carolina in residential transactions. They may ask you on the test which kinds of transactions this form is used in. It is used in resale residential. So what does that eliminate? If first of all, residential, it eliminates commercial, right? You would not use this form in a commercial transaction. That's number one. And the fact that it says resale residential, what does that eliminate?
No new home.
It's not new.
It eliminates new construction, and we'll talk about why you wouldn't want to use this as new construction contract. And it also eliminates vacant land. So while it is by far the most common contract, it's not to be used for everything. Does that make sense for everybody? But would it work on a residential condo as long as it was not a new residential condo? Would it work on that?
Yes.
How about a cash sale on a single family home? Would it work for that? As long as it's not new.
Resale.
Yeah, as long as it's a resale, yep, it would work. How about a financed purchase of a townhouse that was a resale? Would it work for that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. As long as it's residential and resale, it works. We all okay with that? And that's why it's the most common one, because most transactions are residential and most of them are resales. You know, new construction is a relatively small proportion of all transactions. Resales are the vast majority. And so this one is by far the most commonly used one. And it is very commonly misunderstood by people in the pre-licensing class when they take the test. I would tell you that when you take the state part of the exam, probably a quarter of that exam is about this contract, this particular contract. They ask a lot of questions about this particular contract on the state-specific part of the exam because it is so commonly used. They want to make sure that you understand it. Now, the big challenge for you is not to try to apply what you learn about this particular contract to all contracts. Remember, these are not the rules for shoes. These are the rules for Nikes. These rules only apply to this specific contract. Is everybody with me on that? So what I've done in your slides is I've taken basically some snippet screenshots of the actual contract. If you'll notice, it's the exact same thing. Here's the contract itself, and what you got in the slide is just that section of it. I made it easier so we didn't have to go back and forth so much, so that you also had the places to take notes of the important parts of this contract. Page 1 deals with what most people are going to be looking for, which is the money. Page 1 is where the money is going to get handled in the transaction. And so line 1 here is the purchase price. Do you agree that most buyers and sellers are going to be very concerned about what goes in that box right there, what goes on that line? Yeah. When an offer is being made, this is one of the first things that anybody looks at. I mean, it's just human nature. How much are they offering? That's the first thing we always want to know. Are there a bunch of other terms that we're going to talk about with this contract as well, other than the purchase price?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. But everybody always wants to know what the price is. So that's the first, and we may as well get it out of the way first. That's why they put it right here on page 1, right? Just get it out of the way. Let's talk about the purchase price. And so there's nothing more that needs to be said about it. This is the amount that the buyer is promising to pay if they go to closing. Now, there's a very specific reason I phrased it that way, and we're going to talk about that. But I'm going to repeat that. This is the amount that the buyer is promising they will pay, the total amount that the buyer is promising they will pay if we get to what?
Closing.
Closing. The reason I say if we get to closing, there is at least a decent chance that we never get to closing. It is not uncommon for this contract not to close. As a matter of fact, this contract is sort of built not to close. We're going to talk a lot about that. And that's why this contract is tricky for people. But assuming we get to closing, this is the number that the buyer will pay in total. So let me give you an example here. Let's say we write in here $350,000 as the purchase price. Now, there are other lines here on this page, and I'm not going to, and I know it's not the slide where I necessarily circled it, but I want to point out something to you here. There's this line here for a due diligence fee. Let's say that says $2,000 on this line. And then there's a line for an earnest money deposit, and let's say that says $8,000. What did I say about the purchase price? That's the amount of money that they're going to pay in total if we get to closing. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
So these numbers right here, are they in addition to 350 or are they part of that 350?
Part of the 350.
They're part of the 350. That's why you have this line down here at the bottom that says balance of the purchase price in cash at settlement, which is the same thing as closing. This is how much they owe when we get to closing. Well, it's simple math, folks. If they've already paid a $2,000 due diligence fee and an $8,000 earnest money deposit, so they've already paid $10,000, do they owe $350 when we get to closing, or do they owe less than that when we get to closing? What number would be down here on the bottom that they would owe at closing?
$340.
$340,000. Does that make sense for everybody? Because right there, that's going to help you answer some test questions. We don't even know what a due diligence fee is yet, but we know it's not in addition to the purchase price. It is part of the purchase price. Does that make sense for everybody? We might not know yet what an earnest money deposit is, but we know it is part of the purchase price, because the maximum this buyer can be forced to pay if we go all the way to closing is how much money, right? Based on what we just wrote in.
$350,000.
Total amount they're paying is what? $350,000, right? $350,000. Does that make sense for everybody? Now, if we don't go all the way to closing, they're not going to pay all that. Here's what I want you to think of along the way. Stops along the way. It's like a train station. The longer you stay on the train, the more expensive it gets to stay on. This contract is a train route. And this route gets more expensive the longer you ride. Is everybody with me so far? So there are places where you can get off this contract. So let's say we've got contract date. That's the first day. That's where you get on. And we hope you get off all the way down here at closing. If you ride this thing all the way to the end, talk to me. How much does riding this thing all the way to the end cost? Give me a number so I can put that here. If we get to closing, how much does the train ride cost?
$340.
Total.
Total 350.
350.
350. I'm not saying you owe 350 at closing. I'm saying by closing, you would have paid a total of what?
350.
$350,000. If you ride the train all the way, you pay all the money, and that's what that number is. Is everybody with me on that?
Mm-hmm.
What though if I don't ride the train all the way? What if I just ride part of the way? What if I get off right here? And we haven't talked about this yet at a date called the due diligence date. If I only ride until the due diligence date and then I get off, I don't pay the full freight.
You pay $2,000?
I pay the due diligence fee, whatever that number is. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
So if I get off by the due diligence date, if I say to the seller, nope, change my mind, don't want to buy your house, how much money do I owe them? As long as I tell them before we get to the stop that is called the due diligence date. How much money do I owe them?
$2,000.
$2,000. Simple as that. Simple, clean. That's it. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah. Okay.
That's
So if
all
you
I
get
owe
off-
them.
If you get off at the due diligence fee date, you don't have to pay that, but you have to pay everything before.
If I get off at the due diligence date, the only thing I'm paying is the due diligence fee. Because the due diligence fee covers from here to here.
Oh yeah, sorry, I meant like maybe like the initial earnest money deposit. Would you have to pay the 8,000 and the 2,000 then?
No.
No, because I got off by the due diligence date. Well, let me ask y'all a question. If I've dealt with this number, the 350, I know I don't pay unless I ride the whole ride. Does that make sense for anybody, for everybody?
Yeah.
I've dealt with this number because I pay that for this section of the ride. Does that make sense for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
What section of the ride is this number right here for?
Closing.
Not closing.
For the due diligence.
Closing's the whole
Earnest
shebang.
money.
Closing's 350. What section of the ride is that for?
It's for the due diligence, right?
Due diligence.
No.
No, the due diligence period.
Sorry,
Look at the
Miss-
ride and look at what we've not taken care of. Closing takes
Earnest
care of this
closing.
over here.
Okay.
Earnest money.
The due diligence period takes care of this over here. Closing takes care of this over here. Is there a section of the ride that hasn't been paid for yet?
Earnest money.
The earnest money.
The earnest money covers from here
Oh.
to here.
We've seen it late, that's why.
If we
Okay.
get off the ride at any point between the due diligence date and the closing date, so we don't ride all the way to the end. Is everybody with me on that?
Uh-huh.
Did not ride this train all the way to closing. So do we owe them the full purchase price?
No.
No.
No. But we did ride past the due diligence date. So what do we owe them now?
$8,000. Oh,
An
I got it.
$8,000 earnest money deposit.
The earnest money deposit is in case you don't.
Get
Go
off
to-
in time. That's exactly right. It's
Okay.
like, how many of you have driven on 540 and you pass that stupid sign that says last exit before the toll,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you keep driving, they're going to bill you for driving further.
Driving by the toll.
That's
Yeah.
the due diligence date. That sign that says last exit before you owe some money, that's the due diligence date, folks.
Mm.
If you don't want to pay any more money, what should you do by the due diligence date?
Get off.
Get off the
Get
ride.
off.
Get off the ride.
Because if you don't
Okay.
get off the ride, you owe more money.
Oh,
Does that make sense for everybody?
a lot. So the due diligence is part of it. You can decide to step back away from the contract.
That's right.
That makes
Due
the deal
diligence fee
$2,000.
gets, so here's the way to think of it. The due diligence fee gets you on the ride in the beginning. You get
Okay.
to get on the ride because you paid the due diligence
Well,
fee.
due diligence is basically an option of purchase, right?
John just said it. The due
Yes,
diligence is
option
an
to
purchase.
option to purchase.
Purchase.
That's
Okay.
exactly what it is. The due diligence fee gets you on the ride. We're under contract. Congratulations.
So everybody have to do that, go to these steps?
If you use this contract,
Okay.
if you use this contract. So let's give a hypothetical here. Let's go to a blank screen and let's give a hypothetical situation. Let's say here we've got a contract that contract date is today, September 15th is our effective day. That's the day we go under contract. Okay? All right, now here are the facts of the contract. It calls for a due diligence fee of $5,000. It calls for an earnest money deposit of $10,000.
Okay.
And it calls for a sales price of $400,000 with a due diligence date of October 5th and a closing date of October 31st. Those are all the facts about this contract. Is everybody with me so far?
Okay.
Okay. Now watch the magic here. Effective date. How much does it cost to get on the ride? Just to walk on board and say, woohoo, I'm here.
5,000.
$5,000 right away. Boom. $5,000. And who's going to pay that $5,000?
The buyer.
The buyer.
Paid by the buyer
Mm-hmm.
To the seller.
to the seller.
The seller.
But
And
it's
they pay that just to get on the ride. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
Yes.
Now we're on board. Time for this thing to move out of the station. And we got various stops along the way. Well, the whole ride we know is closing. If you ride the thing all the way to the end, we've made it to closing. Isn't that where we hope to get?
Yes.
Mhm.
And we said the closing date was supposed to be October 31st, correct?
Exactly.
Now, how much does it cost in total, if that buyer was to ride this thing all the way to the end and get the closing?
400,000.
100,000.
How much would it cost?
400,000.
$400,000. Because remember, the purchase price is the purchase price. These other numbers are not in addition to. Those numbers are part of the purchase price. Does that make sense for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
So it will have cost a total of $400,000 to get all the way to here. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now, other stops along the way. Here's a stop. October 5th. What's special about October 5th if you look up there?
It's the due
Due
diligence
date
date.
for
Diligence.
So this is our due diligence expiration date.
Okay.
Did we pay to ride the ride this far already?
Yes.
yes.
We did. We paid for that. We paid how much money for that?
$5,000.
5,000.
Maybe.
$5,000. That was an expensive ride, but the ride is
Yeah.
over. It is October 5th. We have to decide. The train has pulled into the station. Are we going to get off? In which case,
I'll keep on moving.
we don't owe any more money, correct?
Right.
Yes.
Or are we going to keep riding? But we know if we keep riding, it costs us more what?
Buddy.
More money in addition to what we've already paid we got to pay some more money if we want to stay on this train. Does that make sense for everybody?
Mhm.
And so we're going to pay an additional
10,000.
how much money to stay on the train on October 5th?
$10,000.
10,000.
$10,000 more to stay on the train past October 5th. How do we feel about that date now? That's an expensive day, ain't it?
It's just good, yeah.
Okay. Here's what we're paying for with that $10,000 to ride this ride all the way
to the shutdown, closing.
Except not to closing. Because if we go all the way to closing, we got to pay all the money.
Oh, okay.
What if I get off the ride right here? They don't even stop at the station. I just jump off. I just kamikaze style, just jump the hell off the train and say, I ain't buying this thing. I'm out. On
You lose
October
15,000.
on October the 30th, I just say, I am out. I am not buying this thing. Can I do that as the buyer?
Yes.
And I paid for the right to do that. How much did it cost me to jump off that train before we get to closing?
$10,000.
15,000.
Total of how much?
$15,000.
A total of $15,000
$15,000.
because it cost me $5,000 to ride that first little section, and it cost me another $10,000 to ride this little section. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
And by the way, we call this liquidated damages.
Liquidated damages.
In other words, if we get off the train before closing, what can the seller expect to get out of us?
15 grand.
A total of 15 grand and nothing more. Does that make sense for y'all?
Mm-hmm.
That's the way this contract is structured. It's all about when you get off. Now, what do we hope people do? We hope people stay on the train the whole time and pull into the station and close. So here's my question. If a buyer really intends to close, does this cost them anything?
No.
No, because it's part of the
No,
total
it's part of it.
Does even that cost them anything?
No.
No.
Because if they get all the way down here to closing, weren't they going to pay that anyway?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So realistically, these aren't monies that you pay to get to closing. These are monies that you pay in case you what?
Don't close.
In case you don't get to closing. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
These are monies that you pay. You're just fronting the money, as Kate said. That's it.
But it doesn't have to be thousands of dollars, right? It can just
No, these are negotiable numbers. That's why they're blanks on the form. So it's any number that people want to agree to. Are we all good on this one? Because once I take it away, it'll when I leave the whiteboard, it erases everything. Are we all okay here?
If you get off by the due diligence date, that means you only have to pay the $5,000.
That's right. If you get off by the due diligence date, then and it doesn't matter. Here's the interesting thing. I'm gonna go back to this color here. If I paid right here, the due diligence date on this day, I paid for this whole section right here. What if I get off right here? How much did it cost me?
It doesn't matter.
$5,000. It doesn't matter if I got off here or there or the day after we went under contract. It all costs the same thing. What? $5,000. So as long as I get off before that due diligence date, it's only going to cost me $5,000. But if I go past that date, it's another 10 locked in.
And if you don't make it to closing, then you owe them the total of the previous fees.
You've already paid it.
Well, yeah. That's what you
They
lose.
just keep it.
Yeah.
If you don't make it to closing, they keep whatever you've paid up to that point.
in the due diligence.
Even you have a good excuse for cancellation?
Even if you have the best excuse in the world, I got coronavirus. We don't care. My mama died. I don't care. I can't get a loan. We don't care.
It's on trial.
The property has termites. We don't care. This contract should be called, I don't care.
Even the buyer dies?
The buyer dies. We don't care.
That's not.
Somebody better tell us they ain't gonna buy this thing by the due diligence date, or they still owe some more money.
It says by the effective date. Where do you put the effective date?
So the effective date is the date we go under contract. The effective date is the date we have communication of acceptance. Okay? Are we all okay with this graph? Can I take it off?
Yeah.
Question. October 5th. So it's up until on that date or before that date?
Up till that date. We'll actually show you, it says 5 p.m. on. It actually specifies a time and the date, and then it says time is of the essence. So it means exactly 5 o'clock on that date.
Okay.
Okay. But here's the thing. Here's the brilliance of this contract. Whether you like it or not, here's the brilliance of it. There are no contingencies in this contract. We don't need contingencies in this contract because normally what would a contingency help somebody get back? Their earnest money deposit, right?
Yeah.
Can a buyer get their earnest money deposit back in this contract for any reason at all?
Nope.
No.
Sure they can, as long as they get off the ride soon enough.
Oh, at the due diligence date.
As long as they get off the ride before the due diligence date, they're not going to be responsible for that earnest money deposit. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
So here's what we tell buyers in North Carolina. But I need to have an inspection. Well, honey, you better get it done before your
due diligence date.
Due diligence date. But I need to get a loan. Well, you better get that
before that due diligence date.
Before your due diligence date. But I need to get an appraisal. Well, go for it. But you better do it before your due diligence date, because that's the only protection you got, is make sure you don't stay on the ride too long.
Who sets the date?
Who sets the date? Sharon, you were real faint. I'm sorry. Is that right?
Who sets the dates as far as due diligence?
They are negotiable, just like the amounts of money are negotiable, so are the dates. So here, now looking at that picture, if you're the buyer and you know you got to pay the due diligence fee just to go under contract, do you want that to be a short amount of time or you want it to be a long amount of time? Considering you pay the same thing for it, whether it's short or long, what do you want as a buyer?
Probably
longer.
Long time. Because I mean, think about it. As a buyer, you pay the same thing whether it's a day or 10 days or 100 days, right?
Right. Yeah.
The amount is the amount. And so as a buyer, you want to negotiate a long due diligence period. But as a seller, you want people to either get off the ride or lock in some more money sooner.
Right.
So sellers want to push this due diligence date real what?
Small.
Short.
Short. Sellers want short. Buyers want long as far as the dates go.
Travis, do the buyers present the checks at each date or all at once?
That's a really great question, Lou. Generally speaking, we have them present them right up front. And as a matter of fact, if we look at the actual contract itself, it specifies, I'm going to just show you a clean version of this. It actually specifies, if you look here, it says the due diligence fee is made payable and delivered to the seller by the effective date. So it actually specifies that the seller should get that money as soon as we go under contract, because the effective date is the date we go under contract. And then it says for the earnest money deposit right here, it says delivered to the escrow agent. And then it says either, and you have options to check here. You could check, most of us check this box that says within 5 days of the effective date. So it actually has the deadlines for when the money has to be turned in built into the contract. We generally don't want to wait to collect the money till down the road because people might be more reluctant to pay it. You know what I'm saying? Like if you let somebody ride the train all the way to the due diligence date and you haven't gotten their earnest money deposit, they might be tempted to stay on longer and not pay you the earnest money. If you've already got their money, you got them. So we generally try to collect the money right up front. It's a real good question. Okay.
So due diligence fee is, has to be paid when they go into contract.
That's right. Due diligence fee. And notice it says payable and delivered directly to who? Who gets this money right away as soon as we go under contract?
Seller.
The seller.
The seller.
And listen, there's a reason it's called this word right here. Fee means
Just paying them.
non-refundable.
Fundable.
They're not getting that amount of money back. That one's not coming back. That's what they paid to get on the ride. But now, earnest money deposit is refundable as long as they get off the ride by what very important date?
The due diligence date.
The due diligence date. As long as they get off the ride by the due diligence date, they can get that earnest money back. Does that make sense for everybody?
So Travis, who pays the initial, what's it called? Earnest money. Does it come from the bank? Like if someone has a loan, does it come from the loan?
This would be out of the buyer's personal
Out
funds
of personal money. Okay.
because the loan is not going to be funded until we get to closing.
The closing. Okay.
Yeah.
I was just wondering.
So this would be cash a buyer would have to have available at the time they're making their offer.
Travis, which of the earnest deposit or the diligence fee, which one goes to an escrow account if needed?
Well, you tell me, which one you think goes into an escrow account? The one that is refundable or the one that is non-refundable?
The refundable.
Refundable. Earnest money deposit goes into an escrow account. The due diligence fee, since it's non-refundable, we may as well go ahead and give it to the seller, and that's exactly what we do.
Okay.
So you see all these people put their house on the market, right? And it goes under contract in a couple of hours. Are these people seeing some pretty big checks like right then, the day they put that sign up in front of their house?
Yeah.
Yeah. Folks, we're seeing due diligence fees on some of these transactions of $15,000, $20,000.
Wow.
That these sellers are being paid just to go under contract because the buyers are so competitive with each other right now.
So what determines the amount? Is it the price of the
Lord of the Flies, pure competition.
Wow. Okay.
And many sellers are using this as a point of negotiation. They've driven the price up so high they can't drive that anymore. They're like, we listed it at 300 and we're already at 350. We can't really go much higher on price. So what you got on a due diligence fee? You offered us $5,000. Well, we'll take $20,000 as your due diligence fee. So that's become a big part of the negotiations now.
Wow.
Wow.
Now, and here's the thing, and this is what you're not going to like this. I didn't say you had to like it. I said you had to understand it. Does this set up the potential to have some unethical sellers?
Yeah.
Who know they have problems with their property?
Yes.
And know that buyers are going to be fighting to get under contract. Let me tell you something, folks. If you were an unethical seller right now and your HVAC system stopped working, the easiest way to take care of that is put a for sale sign in front of your house.
Oh, gosh.
Wow.
Because 2 days later, you're going to have a check from a buyer for $8,000, $10,000, $12,000, $15,000. That's your money, non-refundable. Now, here's the risk. Might the buyer decide they're going to go through with it and close on your house?
Yeah.
Yeah. But if they decide they don't want to, guess who gets to keep the money?
You do.
You do. So guess who just paid for your new air conditioner?
The buyer.
That buyer did.
Yeah.
That buyer did. And listen, you got to understand how much this is going to enter into negotiations later on in the contract. Because here's what happens. Buyers come in there now and they pay these $10,000 due diligence fees, and then they do an inspection. And the seller's sitting back going, yeah, you inspected all you want to. Look, please look. And then the buyer finds out that the HVAC system is pumping carbon monoxide into the house and it's going to probably kill everybody if you turn the heat on this winter. Now is that a problem that needs to be taken care of? So the buyer, completely meaning well, because this is the way real estate has worked since the beginning of the time, goes, well, can you fix the air conditioner? Can you replace the heat for us because it's going to kill somebody? Now, in a normal real estate market, the seller would feel compelled to do that. And here's why. Because if they don't, and they lose the sale, they're stuck trying to put their house back on the market. And would they have a material fact that their listing agent would have to disclose to the next buyer now that they're aware that they have this problem, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
See, here's why that's not a threat anymore, though. Because here's what the seller's going to say when that buyer says, well, can you replace the HVAC system? The seller's going to say, no. And the buyer's going to say, but, you know, we may not buy this house because it's dangerous.
Okay.
And the seller's going to say, okay, good. And the buyer's going to say, but you can't sell it without fixing it. And the seller's going to say, oh, I am going to fix it. I'll just use your money to fix it. And then I'll turn around and sell it to somebody else.
Wow.
That is the current state of our real estate market with this contract. This contract, folks, is absolutely brass tacks. This is take the gloves off. We ain't playing around with you. Contract time.
Wow.
So you got to be a real, you know what? Okay.
You got it. You better know how to look out for yourself, because it's tough with this contract as a buyer, because nobody's going to feel sorry for you.
Jeez.
Okay?
Buyers beware.
Travis, can I ask you a question about how can a seller use this contract if he's not part of the realtors?
They can't.
And how will he is this the diligence fee applies in any contract, or?
No, this is very unique to this contract. This is a very unique feature of this contract. As a matter of fact, if you go to any other state and you explain to them this is how our contract works, they're like, what? This is why buyers, when they move to North Carolina, get screwed every single time. Buyers that are moving to North Carolina, because here's what happens. They come in and their agents aren't clear to them about how this works. And they say, well, listen, you're probably going to have to offer like a $10,000 due diligence fee to get your offer accepted. In their mind, the due diligence fee is what they're more accustomed to as an earnest money deposit at home, which means they have the right to inspect the property. And if they find stuff, the seller has to fix it. And none of that's true here. And so they get
North Carolina. Wow.
They get into this thing, they find these problems, and the seller basically says, we ain't touching it. There's no, and listen, I'm not trying to be harsh on the seller. The seller is just responding to the market. What motivation does the seller have to fix anything when there are 15 other buyers that are crawling over each other to buy the same house saying we don't care about that problem?
Who wouldn't do it?
People are going to look out for themselves. That's the reality of the thing. That's why they hire us, to have more knowledge, to be more knowledgeable. And so this contract is very different because of the non-refundable due diligence fee.
I'm sorry. So someone like a FISBO, he cannot do that, can he?
A FISBO cannot use this form because this form belongs to the North Carolina Association of Realtors.
But he can he charge some type of fee, like the example?
Sure,
example that way you were
a
showing.
FSBO could go to an attorney and say, I want a contract that's similar to the one that NC Realtors uses with that
Okay.
non-refundable fee, and they could pay an attorney to draft one for them. Sure.
Gotcha.
Okay,
Thank
Travis,
you,
so, okay, so what if the seller is under contract, the buyer is under the due diligence, they pay the due diligence, then the seller says, I don't want to sell the home.
They don't get
That's a
that
breach of
choice.
contract.
That's a breach.
Okay, so then they would have to pay back the money.
Well, not only would they have to pay back the money, but they're probably going to be sued by that buyer for consequential damages, compensatory damages, and maybe even specific performance, forcing them to sell the property.
Okay, so that's why, that would be a reason why the seller would say, no, I'm not going to fix anything, of course, to make the buyer not want to purchase.
That's right. Essentially, they're trying to, I mean, I actually overheard a conversation back in March when we were still having in-person classes. There was 2 agents that were taking the same class, and they were involved in a transaction together with each other. And they were trying to debate about repairs in the lobby. And the buyer's agent said, well, we would really like for you all to fix this roof. There's clearly a leak and there's mold. We would like you to fix that. And the listing agent said, well, I've presented that to the seller and they've said no. And the buyer's agent said, well, you know, we could walk away from this deal. And here's what the listing agent said. Well, they're really hoping you do. Just FYI, they're really hoping you will walk away because they would really like to keep your client's money and sell it to somebody else.
Ouch.
Because at that point, if it's fixed, they can charge even more money.
Well, that's it. They know they have the upper hand because they have other buyers that are willing to buy it, don't care about the problem, or could fix it and sell it for even more. That's exactly right.
So we as agents are not obligated to explain this to them?
We are very obligated to explain this. And this is one of the areas where agents are, in my opinion, doing the worst job right now, which is explaining to buyers the risk of this contract in a very competitive market.
That would be something to really explain to the buyer.
Yes.
Yeah, to go in depth.
Yeah, to explain the risk associated with this contract in a very competitive market. Now, here's the thing. If the market's not competitive, if you're in one of the rural areas of the state where stuff still sits on the market, the due diligence fee might be $50. It might even be $0. Well, if you're in that kind of a situation, the buyer has all the power. Does that make sense for everybody? So the amount really dictates who has the power, and that's just based on your local market and how competitive it is. So the fee means non-refundable. It is paid directly to the seller as soon as we go under contract. This is a snippet of where the due diligence period is listed on the contract. And so this would be one of those lines we would fill in. So in our example, we said it was October 5th. So we write in October 5th of 2020. And notice it says extending through 5 p.m. on October 5th, time being of the essence. What did we say that phrase time being of the essence means when we put it in our contract?
There is no exception. It will happen on that date.
That's it. That's it. So if you call us at 5:15 on October 5th, you stayed on the train too long.
Yeah.
You owe the earnest money. Does that make, because this date, really, rather than the due diligence date, we should call it the earnest money date.
Yeah.
Because this is the date when the earnest money goes from refundable to non-refundable. That's what happens on this day.
Because the due diligence fee is non-refundable regardless.
That's right. The due diligence fee is non-refundable no matter what, but the earnest money at the beginning is refundable until we get to this date, and then the earnest money becomes non-refundable.
What about the time? Like, wouldn't you have until like 4 p.m. or like 3 p.m. of that date?
What do you mean?
Like it says through 5 p.m.
Right. So if you were to notify them at 4:58 on that date, you'd be fine.
Okay.
You'd be in compliance. You can't do it after that.
Right.
Can't do it after that. Okay. It's a negotiable period of time. It's a negotiable amount of money. And here's the big thing about the due diligence period. It is a period of time that the buyer can terminate the contract for what reason?
Any reason.
Any reason.
Any reason they want, and get a refund of their earnest money deposit, as long as they terminate during the due diligence period. If they go past the due diligence period, can they still terminate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but now they would lose as well. What
The
else?
earnest money.
Their earnest money would also be lost.
Yeah.
That is how this contract is structured.
Yeah.
Okay.
It can be called a grace period.
Well, it could be, except it costs a lot of money. That's the problem. Yeah, I mean, it is a grace period because it protects your earnest money, but you have paid for it. I mean, you paid a due diligence fee. Maybe a big one, maybe a small one, but you paid for it. And that's why it's pretty much an option fee, because the buyer has that choice during that period of time. Examples of stuff that the buyer should get done. They should do their financing, if they want to have an appraisal done, if they want to do inspections, if they want to try to negotiate repairs, all of that should be done during the due diligence period. Because once you get to the due diligence date, they've also now locked in their earnest money. It became more expensive.
Gotcha.
Okay. Nothing on this slide is going to be tested, just the general idea of what should happen during the due diligence period. Inspections should be done, but they should be completed before the end of the due diligence, because there is no protective contingency. There's no, but I found a major problem. Well, that's good for you. What do you want to do about it? Do you want to terminate it, or do you not want to terminate it? It's tough. It is tough. It's a very hard time to be a buyer's agent. Very hard time to be a buyer's agent right now, because it's very hard to protect them. Because what ends up happening is these due diligence fees are so high in a lot of transactions that the buyer doesn't have the ability to walk away from it. Even if they know they should, even if they find major structural issues with the property, they're so deep into it that they can't afford to get away from it. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
Where I'm coming from? And it happens right now.
$25,000 for due diligence.
Action and pay it to themselves because of
It's
the money they put in.
really tough. Obviously, the buyer has the right to inspect if that's what they want to do. It actually says one of the biggest ways a seller can breach this contract is by not giving access to the property for inspections and that sort of thing. So the seller does have to make the property available for inspections and all of those things to happen.
Travis, I have a question regarding inspections.
Sure.
So if you go on the contract, and so the buyer now has someone to come out and inspect the home.
Mm-hmm.
Possibility it falls through.
The buyer terminates, you mean?
Right.
Uh-huh.
So another buyer comes along.
Mm-hmm.
Can that same inspection be used, or is it best as a buyer to just have your own done?
It can be if the first buyer wants to release it to the new buyer, but I mean, you know, there's not always that level of coordination between them. Now, one of the—
Because I paid for it, I don't want to just—
It's your report, exactly.
Right.
Now, here's one of the things I do, Sharon. If I'm making an offer for a buyer and I know that the property was under contract and it was terminated, because I can see that in the MLS history, I can see it went on the market, it went under contract, 2 weeks later it was terminated. Does that automatically raise my suspicions that it could be possible the buyer found problems with the property? Just knowing that it was under contract and terminated, am I suspicious that there might be some problems?
Right, because as a buyer, not knowing the process, yes, that would be my first thoughts.
All right, so here's what I would do as a good buyer's agent in that position. I would reach out to the buyer's agent that represented that first buyer, because that's going to show on the MLS. It's one of the benefits of being a member of the MLS. I can see who had it under contract the first time, and I'm gonna call them and I'm gonna say, listen, did your buyer have an inspection done? And if they say yes, I'll say, we'll buy it from you. Rather than us scheduling a separate inspection and we gotta wait a week for the inspector to get out there, we'll write your buyer a check for $400 right now and get the inspection. Can we do that? Can we buy the inspection from buyer number one?
Yeah.
And it's better for them. They want to do it because they want to get whatever money they can get back out of it.
Right.
And it's better for my buyer because we get it sooner and probably cheaper. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It does.
So that's what I would do as a buyer's agent.
Okay.
Okay.
And by the way, I might even do that before we made our offer. I might call that buyer's agent and say, what's the deal? Why'd you terminate? Was it about the inspection? We'll buy that inspection report from you. Because might it be worth it to, if we were offering a $3,000 or $4,000 due diligence fee, would it be worth it to pay that other buyer $400 for their inspection before we committed to that big due diligence fee?
Yeah.
See, I know how to work it. That's what you hire me for. That's the value of having a good agent in your corner. Somebody who knows all those nooks and crannies and knows how to find that stuff and knows how to leverage that, because buyers need all the help they can get right now.
If you trust that inspector.
Right, and that's the truth. We may get that report and want to still have another one, but at least we would have had some reference point before we leapt out there in the dark and committed to, this big expense of another due diligence fee.
So
and y'all are right. That's the kind of thing that comes with experience.
So are we allowed to ask the seller's agent, or if, like you said, was it related to the inspection?
And not only allowed, but you should, because if they know of those items, they're supposed to be disclosing them anyway.
But what if it wasn't related to the inspection? What if it was just something maybe the buyer couldn't get a loan? Or...
And that's exactly what you don't know. That's why I'd love to see a copy of their inspection. Not only would I love to see a copy of their inspection, I'd love to see a copy of their appraisal. We might offer to pay them for that too. We might offer. I know we can't use it for our loan, but it would give us a good idea of if they had one, if they got to that point. All of that could be very valuable data to my buyer if they're thinking about making an offer.
So if it's anything like personal, they may not be able to relay that to us, but they can say it was not related to the inspection, and that would kind of give us some idea.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
I'm curious. As an agent, I know I was a buyer recently, and I'm just curious from your perspective. For most buyers like I am, I would have bought my house no matter what was wrong with it, pretty much, because I was so worried about not finding another one.
Right. That is common right now.
That's what I figured.
It is common. Amber said that when she bought her house, it was a little faint, so I'm going to repeat it. When she said when she bought her house, she was so worried about not finding another one that it really wouldn't have mattered what she found as far as problems go. She was closing on it because it was impossible to find one. A lot of buyers feel that way right now, Amber. And that puts us in a tough position as buyers agents, because what tends to happen is if buyers find problems after the fact, they start to look at us and go, well, why didn't you tell me that? Why didn't you help me with that? Why did you let me do this? And that's why we have to be really on top of it as much as we can.
But if they buy it knowingly, then that's fine. Because
of course, absolutely. If they have all the information and they knowingly do that, then that's absolutely fine. It's when they make these decisions without all the information.
Right.
And we haven't done enough to get them the information that it becomes a problem.
Right.
I have a quick question, Travis. I'm trying to grasp all this. Due diligence can be refunded back if they, in that certain time frame, if they find issues like with the inspection, and you said absolutely not. No, the due diligence is non-refundable. Okay.
Earnest money.
Earnest money would be refunded during that time frame.
Okay.
Due diligence non-refundable, but earnest money refundable. Then once you get past the due diligence expiration, then earnest money is also non-refundable.
Okay.
But the earnest money is refundable for any reason during due diligence period.
Right. We don't even, listen, some buyers terminate and don't even give a reason. I mean, they just say, I'm out. Why? I don't have to tell you. And they don't. They don't have to give a reason. They just change their mind. That's fine. Okay. This contract also has what some buyers find to be a very shocking statement. And I've already mentioned it a couple of times, but I want to point out to you that it does say that. What does this statement right here mean? The property is being sold in its current condition. What does that mean in like normal people language, layperson language?
It is what it is.
As is.
As is, where is. We are not fixing stuff for you. You better know what you're buying because we are selling it as is. I love it when I look on a listing and somebody says, this is an as-is sale. I'm like, if you use this contract, they all are. It says it right there in the contract. Okay, and this is the most common contract used in North Carolina. And then this is what we talked about as far as the earnest money deposit. It says the buyer shall have the right to terminate this contract for any reason or no reason, as long as they do it during the due diligence period. And if the buyer timely delivers the termination, the contract shall be terminated and the earnest money deposit shall be refunded. But only refunded if they terminate during the due diligence period. If they go past the due diligence period, they're not getting their earnest money back either. Okay? And that's where it says it right here. It says, in the event of a breach of this contract by the buyer, the earnest money deposit shall be paid to the seller as liquidated damages. So if the buyer doesn't get off the ride in time, if they stay on past the due diligence date, but they still don't make it to closing, they're going to forfeit their earnest money deposit as liquidated damages. Now, here's the key, and this is the one place where this contract really does protect the buyer. Is that an important phrase right there, to say that the earnest money is going to serve as liquidated damages?
Yep.
Because that means the seller can't do what?
Sue the buyer.
They can't use it.
They can't do anything with it.
The seller cannot sue the buyer. They get the earnest money, and that's all. Get out of our face.
That means you have to sell your house.
And they got to come back and sell their house to somebody else, right? And put it back on the market and sell it to somebody else. So sellers should understand the importance of the earnest money deposit. Because if you accept an offer, could you accept an offer with zero earnest money? Would that be possible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But then what would be the penalty for a buyer that refused to close?
Nothing.
It would be nothing. And you couldn't get anything from them. So that earnest money deposit is an important amount of money for the seller.
I got it.
Okay. Basically, figure it out during the due diligence period. This contract takes 14 pages to say that. The buyer should figure it out during the due diligence period. Whether they want to buy or not, figure it out during the due diligence period. As far as handling the money, earnest money deposits go into an escrow account because they're potentially refundable. The due diligence fee goes directly to the seller because it is non-refundable. Okay, so we put the earnest money in a escrow account because it could potentially be refunded. We put the due diligence fee, we just go ahead and deliver it directly to the seller. If the buyer is late with the money, if they don't pay the money on time, the contract says that the seller has to give them demand. They have to say, I want my money in writing. And then they have to allow 1 banking day for the buyer to come into compliance. So if the buyer is, when did we say the due diligence fee was due, for example?
The day the contract is.
As soon as we go under contract, right? Well, what if it's 2 days after we go under contract and the buyer has not delivered the due diligence fee? Here, this is what we're talking about. What should the seller do? If the
Pay
Give them one banking day.
They should
Demand their
make
money.
written demand, them, I want my money. You owe me the money, give me my money in writing, make that demand, and then wait how long?
1 day.
One banking day.
One banking day.
Banking day. One banking day is how long you have to give them to basically be good on.
24 hours.
Well, it could be 24 hours. It could be more than 24 hours. Because, like, what if they make written demand on a Friday? If they
Yeah,
make written demand for
banking
the
day,
money
so
on
it's
Friday,
48 hours.
the next banking day is not till Monday.
Yeah.
So the buyer would have until Monday to get it done.
And if the buyer still didn't,
If the buyer still did not at that point in time, then the seller would basically declare the contract terminated and put it back on the market and sell it to somebody else.
okay.
Happened to me.
Oh,
This one does happen from time to time. Yeah, for sure.
And
Okay.
how much time it has to submit that demand for the money?
They can make the demand anytime they want to. I'll tell you when I make the demand, if I'm on the listing side, as soon as we go under contract, I say, congratulations, your offer has been accepted. The due diligence fee is due today. When can we expect it? That way, I've already made written demand, so they got to get it to us within one banking day.
So it's like they are on the ride, but the train's not starting until you pay me my due diligence money.
Well, we're under contract, but you haven't paid to be under contract until you pay the due diligence money. Okay?
So Travis, when you said the day of the contract that you normally call and you tell them, okay, your contract has been accepted, you're under contract, I expect your due diligence in the office today. Is that in writing or is that just verbal?
Writing. In writing, because it says we have to make written demand for the funds.
Okay.
And so I will put it in an email. Congratulations, your offer's been accepted. I look forward to working with you. The due diligence fee is due today. When can we expect it?
Got you.
That way I'm covered as far as protecting the seller that we've made written demand for the money. Because that way, if it's 2 days later and they haven't paid, can we just terminate it and sell it to somebody else?
Yeah.
Yep, because we've allowed them one banking day.
One banking day. Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Travis.
In this case, the buyer
Yes, sir, Dan.
didn't get any money.
One question so I can tie a knot in my brain about this due diligence fee. Is there any breach on the seller side that can affect this as far as the buyer receiving it again or getting it back?
Yes. What if the seller breaches? So I'm going to skip ahead to that because it's 2 slides ahead. What if the seller breaches?
That was my question.
There is no protection in this contract for a seller that breaches. Here's what it says. If the seller fails to comply with any of their obligations or breaches this contract, and the buyer elects to terminate this contract, then the earnest money deposit and the due diligence fee shall be refunded to the buyer. Okay, so that's number one. If the seller breaches, give the buyer all their money back. Is everybody okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
But
Yes.
But it doesn't say as liquidated damages. It says, and the seller shall reimburse the buyer the reasonable cost actually incurred by the buyer. There's our compensatory damages. And without affecting other remedies. So can the seller still be sued even after they pay all this money? Even if they give the buyer all their money back and pay the buyer all this money they spent, could the buyer still sue them for even more?
Yes.
Yes.
They sure could. So sellers need to really think twice before they breach this agreement.
Okay, thank you, sir.
This thing's got some real teeth in it for a seller that breaches. Okay.
So are we as agents, or is it the buyers who actually, do we inform them of this or say, hey, you know, you have the right to go to court to sue them, or they need to read the fine print and know
No,
that
you,
that's
I think that's entirely an appropriate way to say it. You have the right to sue them if they breach. Don't say you should sue them if they breach.
Okay.
That's advice. That's legal advice. But to just plainly state you have the right to sue them is an appropriate way to explain that.
okay.
There's one thing that's built into this contract that I think a lot of people would normally consider a breach that this contract says specifically is not a breach. Paragraph 13 is labeled delay in settlement or delay in closing. Do you think sometimes there are delays in closing?
Yes.
Yes. Here's what this contract says about a delay in the closing. It says, basically, if a party is unable to complete the settlement by the settlement date, but they intend to, so they're still working toward closing the transaction, and I'm going to skip over, then the delaying party shall give as much notice as possible, and they shall be entitled to a delay in settlement. Does it say they have to ask for a delay, or does it say they're just entitled to it?
They're entitled to it.
They're entitled to it. Do they have to say, we need a delay, can we please have an extra 3 days? Or can they just say, we're delayed by 3 days?
We're delaying by 3 days.
They just make an announcement, we're delayed by 3 days. It says, if the parties fail to complete settlement within 14 days of the settlement date, then the delaying party shall be in breach. So they're not actually in breach until they've delayed for how long?
14 days.
14 days. So another way to say that is anybody who signs this contract, buyer or seller, how long can they put off closing?
14 days from the original date.
Up to 14 days past the original closing date. So this is one of those things that I think gets very underexplained when agents are presenting this contract. Here's why. What if your buyer has timed their move perfectly? What if they have scheduled the movers to have all of their stuff on a truck on the closing day, and they packed it all up, and they got everything on the rider truck waiting to be unloaded at the new house? And on the day of closing, the seller says, I didn't get moved out in time. I need another week. Does the seller have that right if this contract has been used?
Yes.
They do. They do. They actually have that right to delay up to how many days?
14.
14 days. So folks, when I present this contract to a buyer or a seller, I say, don't make plans for that closing day. Don't do it, because they can delay. Make sure you've got some wiggle room where if they delayed, it wouldn't be a big deal for you. Now, do they always listen to me? Absolutely not.
No.
But I still say it. I warn them about it. Yeah, Amber, it stresses a lot of us out. That 14-day delay is not fun. It is not fun when you get into that thing. But it happens. It does happen. Okay. That is about all for that contract. I mean, there's like big philosophical questions of, do you think the due diligence contract is good for the buyer or bad for the seller or whatever? But most of that just depends on your market. If you're in a market where things are super competitive, you probably think this contract sucks for buyers and is great for sellers. If you're in a market where things sit on the market forever and due diligence fees are like $50, you probably think this is the worst contract ever for a seller and great for the buyers. Really, the contract itself is not good or bad for either one. It's the amount of the due diligence fee that dictates the swing in power. And so that's the one thing I would say practically for you all with this contract is just to understand how important the amount of that due diligence fee really is. I mean, it's super important. That makes sense for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, Chuck, do we need to know the good title, legal access?
So right here, you're talking about the most common seller breach.
Mm-hmm.
I've already hinted around it, and I was coming back to it. So I'm glad you asked the question, which is the most common breach by a seller is they can't close. They have a title problem. Could a title problem come up when we do title searches before we get to closing? Right? When the closing attorney is doing title research, could they find a potential title issue?
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes the seller's job to straighten that out. What if the seller can't get it straightened out? That is a breach. And that is by far the most common breach of this contract. But it is still a breach because they've said the seller shall execute and deliver. What kind of deed do they have to give to the buyer based on this contract?
General warranty deed.
A general warranty deed, which conveys marketable and insurable title. So if they have a title problem, they can't comply with this contract. Could that end up costing them a lot of money?
Yes.
Yes. So one of the things I talk about with my sellers is, do we need to have a title search done before we put it on the market? Do we need to pay an attorney $100, $150? Let's go ahead and do a title search ourselves just to make sure you don't have this problem, because this problem could be really expensive for you.
And this would be good for those sellers who bought the house in a resale versus those that bought new construction.
And those that bought like a foreclosure or some kind of a distress sale or something like that, where there might be questionable things that have happened with the property in the past.
Yeah.
It'd be a good idea to do a title search before you put it on the market. They're not that expensive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just to be sure you know you can convey marketable title, because you don't want to be in breach as the seller.
But there would be no reason if you bought it as new construction to do so.
Probably not. Most likely not. Most likely not. Okay. Last couple of points we want to talk about here. An addendum or addenda. The key phrase here is add. These are additions that are made to contracts. They are additions made, and they are additions made before we're under contract. So if you wanted an addendum included, you would include it as part of your offer. Does that make sense for everybody? These would be things that you would include as part of your offer. They would be agreed to up front, you know. But like, for example, if the property was already under contract and you wanted your offer to be accepted as a backup contract, you might include a backup contract addendum with your offer. So addendums, or addenda, which is the correct plural, addenda, are used to basically add other terms and conditions to offers before they have been accepted. I'm going to add something in here. I'm going to do a blank screen for just a second. That is different than this thing.
Amendments.
Amended.
Amendments.
Amendments are changes
to a contract.
To existing contracts. So if we have a contract already in place and we wanted to change the purchase price, would we use an addendum or would we use an amendment?
Amendment.
We would use an amendment. An amendment makes a change to something after it's already in effect. Okay. We already talked about submitting offers. Submit them all, period. And don't submit them in any particular order. Submit whatever you have on hand at any given time, all at one time. Make sure, even if backup offers come in, no matter how late, no matter how silly they seem, you present all of them. As far as how offers are terminated, there are lots of ways that an offer can be terminated. They can be rejected. That would terminate. Counteroffer would terminate an offer. If they place a time limit on them and we pass that time limit, that would terminate them. Death of either party would terminate an offer, but death would not terminate a contract. So once it was under contract, if the buyer dies, are we still under contract?
Yes.
Yes. The seller dies, does their family still have to sell the property to the buyer?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But if we're at the offer stage and one of the parties dies, the offer goes away. Okay. So contracts survive death, but offers do not. You don't need earnest money. You don't need a due diligence fee. They could be zero. Okay. They could be zero as long as you have a purchase price. You do need a purchase price because you have to have legal consideration. This is going to show up as a test question in the North Carolina specific section. I can 100% guarantee it. We are not eBay. We are not allowed to disclose what the current high bid on a property is. We're not allowed to tell one buyer what another buyer has offered. Does that make sense for everybody? Offers are confidential, meaning if you get a test question that says your seller tells you, you have offers from Yusra and Candace on your listing, and your seller Sharon says, call Yusra and tell her that Candace's offer is higher and see if she'll raise her offer. What do? Do you follow that instruction of your client, or do you tell them I can't do that?
Can't do it.
Can't do
not do that. Even if your client tells you.
I thought you had to ask for permission of the.
You can ask permission. You can ask the buyers, are you okay with me disclosing your offer? But of course their answer is going to be what?
No.
No, I'm not okay with you disclosing my offer. Now, assuming if you could get the buyer to give you permission, it would be okay. But otherwise, you're not going to know what somebody else's offer is. You shouldn't. Okay. And yes, Amber, it's not fun because sometimes you feel like you're bidding against yourself, right? You don't know. You don't know.
Hey, Travis, when,
yes.
Oh my God, I done forgot my question just a second. Oh, when you're doing the offers, submitting the offers to the seller, and like you say, you just give what you have.
Yep.
You only offer advice when they ask about which would be the best, or can you, I'm quite sure you've already viewed the offers, and
if you're the seller's agent, you're going to offer your advice whether they ask or not.
Okay.
Like about the quality of the offers and which one you think is preferable and all those kinds of things. The only time you would not give that advice is if you were in dual agency.
Dual agency.
If you were in dual agency, you wouldn't give any advice about any offers.
Okay.
Okay. We talked about communication of acceptance. Don't need anything else there. Last couple of things here in this chapter, and we will be done with contracts. And I know it's a slog to get through. I know it's late, but we really just a couple of things here, a couple of weird contracts. So we are no longer talking about the 2T. These are not standard. These are weird. In fact, they don't exist as pre-printed forms. You'd have to get an attorney to draft these. These are out there type contract agreements. Okay. So an installment land contract, which is also known as just a land contract. So it could be called a land contract, or it could be called a contract for deed. They all mean the same thing. The installment land contract is what most people are referring to when they say this phrase right here in real estate. Oh, he's doing a what?
Rent to own.
Rent to own. Well, the truth is there's no such thing as rent to own in the state of North Carolina when it comes to real estate. But there is a type of purchase where you pay the seller in installments, in payments. And you don't own the property until you've made every single payment. Does that make sense for you all? Now, if you stop making payments, guess what they do?
They kick you out.
They kick you out. So basically everything you paid was forfeited up to that point. Does that make sense?
Right.
Okay. If you make all the payments though, they will transfer ownership over to you. That is called an installment land contract. Does that make sense for everybody? Here's why that's so weird from the buyer's perspective. Normally, even though buyers are making payments, who are they normally making payments to?
The
The
seller.
lender.
A lender, right?
Oh, yeah.
A lender. Usually, don't we give the seller all of their money at closing?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so therefore, they sign over ownership of the property to us right away. Does that make sense? That way, even though we're making payments, if we decide 2 years later we want to sell, can we sell that property? If we bought it with a normal transaction, can we decide a couple years later, I want to sell?
Yes.
Yeah, because it's yours.
Yes.
Does that make sense? With this, you can't do that because you can't sell what doesn't belong to you. And on this type of transaction, the property doesn't belong to you at all, not even a little bit, until you've made how many of the payments?
All the payments.
Every single one. Who is going to continue to remain owner of this property while the payments are being made?
The owner.
The seller is.
The seller.
The seller is going to remain the owner of the property the entire time these properties are being paid off. Now, usually the person who is making the payments does occupy the property during that time, but they're essentially occupying a property they don't own.
It's just like renting.
And that's why most people call it rent to own. Because it seems like you're paying what?
Rent.
Rent. But it's a little bit better. It's a half click better than renting, because if you do make all the payments, the property will eventually be yours. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. If all the payments get made, then we will transfer. Obviously, there are tremendous disadvantages for the buyer here. They don't own the property until they've completely paid it off. They run the risk of forfeiting everything they've paid in. You know, that's a risk. There are advantages to the buyer of this stuff. And let me tell you why. Some buyers have a real problem right here.
Yeah.
They can't borrow the money because their credit is so bad. If you can't find anybody to loan you the money, but you can convince the seller to take payments, can you still buy a property?
Yes.
Yes, and that would be an installment land contract. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
So the only buyers who should really consider doing this are ones who can't get financing any other way. This is like last chance saloon here. If the buyer couldn't get regular financing, they would do a regular purchase. They would not do an installment land contract. Is everybody with me on that? Because it's terrifying to think that the seller still continues to own this property the entire time you're making payments.
Mr. Travis, can I add something to that?
Sure.
My first home, I actually bought it like that, and I must say it can be very dangerous if you're not aware, because like on my contract, it said that if I was late 5 days past my payments, it will become a rental agreement.
There you go.
So it was so easy to lose the first agreement to purchase the home.
You're almost set up to fail, right?
Yeah, but I must say that didn't happen, and I actually paid the house off in 6 years.
Good. And that's the thing. If they work out well, they are very effective at accomplishing the goal of having someone purchase property when there's really no other way to get it done. But they come with a very big set of risks for the buyer. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay. Now,
and they can't sell the property long as they're under this contract.
That's right, because they don't own it. They don't own it.
No, I'm talking about the seller.
No, the seller should not be able to sell it if, but this is where people have to know what they're doing. If this thing is properly done, this would be recorded at the county courthouse to prevent the seller from selling it to somebody else. So that people who were thinking about buying the property, this would come up in their title search.
So it would just say installment land contract.
That's right. You would record the actual installment land contract down at the county courthouse. You know, as far as the seller goes, there are some advantages and disadvantages from the seller's perspective. Advantages are, you know, they get to hold on to the title until it's completely paid off. So they have the ultimate protection. If you're the seller in this thing, let's just be real honest. If you're the seller in this thing, don't you start to hope to root against these people after a while? Like if you get like deep into this thing and they're close to getting it paid off, aren't you sitting there like, come on, baby, don't make that payment this month. Miss this one. Come on, just miss one. Just miss it. Because as soon as you miss it, I'm gonna kick your ass out and we'll sell it to somebody else. Literally, isn't that a seller's mindset in this thing? And folks, it happens a lot with these agreements. There are a lot of times when these buyers do default on these agreements, and the sellers just kick them out and start over again with somebody else.
My seller was really hoping for me to miss a payment. He will call me on the due date. Did you make the payment? I said, look at your bank statement. It was there 2 weeks ago.
He was rooting for you to fail, my friend.
He was, so what?
Yeah, and it happens that way. Of course, the big disadvantage from the seller perspective is that they don't get all their money at one time. They have to wait for their money. And that's the biggest disadvantage why most sellers don't want to do this, because most sellers want their money right away. But if you're not in a hurry, this is certainly an advantageous way to do it, you know, if you're not in a hurry for the funds. It's important to remember that when we do an installment land contract, that buyer is not the same as a buyer who has bought under a more traditional purchase agreement. They don't have the same rights as somebody who has bought. They can't go out and take out a mortgage against the property. They can't borrow money against it because they don't own it. They can't refinance it. They can't sell it, not until they've completely paid it off. And so this agreement really does sort of trap the buyer in for quite a period of time while they would pay it off. Amanda, the payments are normally slightly higher than what rent would be because there's normally interest added on to in the same way you would add interest on to a mortgage payment. But that's agreement by agreement. I mean, some of them are, you know, largely the same as what rent would be. It's just if you make so many of them in a row, you own the property. I've seen this very commonly done with farmland. You have people who rent farmland. They don't have the money to purchase the farms that they are tending, for example. And you have families that have owned the farmland for generations, and they don't want to have anything to do with the property, so they rent it out to some tenant farmer. And the farmer may have one of these installment land contracts where if they rent it for, you know, if they make the payments for 40 years, then it becomes their farm. So it's pretty common in farmland, as an example, that this is used for. Okay. Yeah, Priscilla, that's with a balloon payment at the end. That sounds like owner financing to me. Okay. They should be recorded. These installment land contracts should be recorded. We already talked about options to purchase. An option to purchase is a unilateral agreement where only one side has promised to do something. In an option to purchase, who has promised that they will do something? Has the buyer promised they will purchase, or has the seller promised that they will sell to you and nobody else? Which promise
The
has been
buyer.
made?
The seller.
The
buyer.
The seller has promised, but the buyer hasn't promised anything. And if you think of, and usually the buyer pays a fee for that and has a period of time to make that decision. Think about the due diligence contract. Couldn't we just substitute, instead of say option fee, couldn't we just say due diligence fee? Isn't that contract really an option contract? Because the buyer hasn't promised they will purchase the property. All the buyer has promised they will do
Make payments.
is pay a due diligence fee. That's it. Now,
So
if they
the
keep
option
going,
fee is non-refundable.
just like a due diligence fee is.
Okay.
Option fee, due diligence fee, both non-refundable. That due diligence contract, that 2T contract, is pretty much an option contract. It is. All right. Buyers have a big advantage under an option contract once it's under contract, because they have the choice. It is unilateral. The seller is bound, but the buyer is not. Options have to be in writing. And I don't think you need to worry about rights of first refusal. And that is the end of chapter 10.
I have a question.
Ooh. Go ahead.
Okay, this is going to be another dumb question, but say I didn't want to go to real estate school and I wanted to buy a house. And so I'm not going to use an agent, and I put in my offer. I'm going to buy this house for this much, but I want the other 3% that you were going to give to the buyer's agent. But since I'm representing myself, I want that as part of the deal. Can I submit an offer like that? Is that legal?
It's legal for you because you're not licensed. It's not legal for the agent on the other side, if there is one, to present it in that way, because they cannot make compensation part of the offer or contract process according to real estate commission rules.
I see. It wasn't a very popular offer, just for the record.
But yeah, that basically the process breaks down because the listing agent's not really allowed to present it in that manner to the seller.
Okay, thank you, Travis.
Yep. Okay. All right, folks. Well, that takes us through contract.